what we come to realize is that, dealing with these sites and these burial grounds, you're bringing up a dark past, you're bringing up dark history. Not everybody's happy with that, right? And that's the reality. And when you get involved with these type of projects, you will quickly find the neglect um, of these sites. Um, they're hidden, they're not taken care of, they're kind of almost wiped off the map. You have to be a person, which in our case, we had a professor who was dedicated on map tracking. And because of his work in the 1980s, he had seen that this site was on the map. But when you go to the site, you see houses and backyards directly across, maybe 2 to 3 houses down from where we are located, where the enslaved Africans are buried at. There were the Dutch, who was the slave owners, almost 3 buildings down and across the street. Trying to paint a little picture. Um, they that site now is a medical facility, but what they did was they exhumed all of them. They resumed all of them that was buried over there. They resumed all the Dutch graves over there, moved them to the old Dutch church and buried them over there. And then they built the medical facility. Now, when you come across the street, 3 houses down to the enslaved Africans, they didn't exhume anybody. They just knocked down the headstones. Um, they're not located. We found broken headstones that they used to fill in little holes. You know, we found that, and they just built on top of them. This is the differences of the disrespect and the oppression that we still even facing today. You know, about how we are treated. And we can see it in these sites of these graves in the cemeteries. We can see the beautifications of certain cemeteries and the neglect of other cemeteries. So I think nationally there should be a calling, you know, to Washington to a mandatory acknowledgement and respect and like I said, reparations to it. In this work, you're going to bring out the dark history, and this is what they don't want. So it's very sad, that we still have to fight this type of fight. I don't think anybody asking, I can't speak for everybody, but I don't think we asking to hang anybody. We asking to acknowledge what what had happened, and we asking to keep them present as just as well as you keep any other culture present, to this day.
What would your message be to those who still don't understand the importance of preserving these Black burial sites?
I would say, I think people get that part, like why, and they may get it intellectually, they may get it on the surface, or even get it emotionally. I think the greatest conversation or question is, why aren't we? We got to unpack that. Why don't we? How come the city of Kingston does not level up the value or see the value in this? So it's from the city level, from the the leadership level in a particular city. Here we are in Kingston, to the individual level. The individual is about the internalization of oppression and colonization. The city could be the same thing, but from another angle.
All the way out to the stop sign, all the way out to the road with lots of trees. In fact, if you see behind me, there are trees behind me. And those trees, or let's say they're sister and brother trees that used to be in the cemetery, was all over. You couldn't even see the headstones that you are seeing behind me right now. All right. So the problem is that as the cemetery got filled up, they had to start another cemetery for the people of color. Midland Cemetery was vibrant all the way up until the 1980s as far as burying people. Midland Cemetery had been to the point where they couldn't make any more money on it. and whoever the owners were at that time and people that was supposed to be in charge of taking care of it, it's like, no more money, we'll just let it go. And that's what happened. The caretakers weren't there. The people that was supposed to be in charge of taking the cemetery, taking care of it, weren't there to be found, nowhere to be found. And it just went into a disarray. So because of that, there were not relatives, well, yeah, some relatives. There were people who tried over the years to maintain it on their own, to do their own family trees, their own family plots. They would go into it, including my own parents. At one time, when I was just a child, a young child, they went in there with other people from the community to try to clean it up. And unfortunately, I think it kind of made things worse because they used a bulldozer and they knocked over, some of the headstones, and they got pushed into the gullies and whatever. So those things are still being looked for. But over the years, I think because it got so overrun and the trees were so big and some of the trees were engulfing some of the headstones, that they just kind of gave up. Plus the fact that, just like myself, getting older, and you just don't have the energy, you don't have the wherewithal, you don't have the community backing you anymore. And some people say, well, they're dead, who cares, and let it go. So that's what was going on. So when I stepped in, it was full of weeds and trees and lots of trees and debris and trash and everything else that could be had in the cemetery. And what I found out from a person who was working in the codes department, that they had officially condemned the cemetery. And with that being said, when I came on the site to say, look, I'm going to take care of my own grandfather who was buried there, my mom's father, and try to do whatever I could for him, I was told I couldn't do it because it was condemned. Well, when they told me that they would put me in jail, I was like, okay, here we go. So I guess I got to find somebody who's going to get me out of jail, because I'm going to do what I need to do. And I did what I had to do. So we ended up, I guess, breaking the law. And I started getting the cemetery cleaned up and getting people organized, and having the Pennsylvania conservationists at the time come in and help me cut down quite a few trees. The 1/4 of the trees, out there in the front part of the cemetery. And every year, so after that, we took another area and cut down the trees to find all these wonderful stories and history of the people buried there. So it's come a long way from being condemned to now being on the National Register of Historic Places.
And that's so excellent to hear. Oh, Daniela, did you want to add anything? Oh, I was just gonna say that's so excellent to hear, because I feel like so many people don't know where to start, don't know where to turn to if they want to try to preserve their loved ones' remains. Considering that you guys made it happen, and you made it happen despite it being condemned, I guess what encouragement would you give to others? Because I know there's so many others facing this right now. We just got off the phone with somebody from whose ancestors were in the Mississippi Delta, and she just is not getting any level of support from the community to support and honor her ancestors. What encouragement would you give to others who are facing the same battle that you faced so many years ago?
Well, and that's the whole thing, many years ago when I stepped out on this here assignment, I had no clue what I was doing. I really didn't. And I didn't know who to talk to. I did speak to one woman who has since passed, and she really couldn't give me too much advice because it wasn't the same type of a cemetery. The cemetery that she was dealing with was a cemetery that was connected to the church, her church. And they had their own cemetery organization within the church that could go out and maintain the cemetery and take care of it. In my case, because I was going into the woods and coming out with history, it made it so different because I had to cut down every tree to find the history. And so I would say to them, and this is what I have, knock me down if you want. God gave me this assignment because he said I needed something to do, other than going to work for the Department of Welfare all the time, trying to keep this lady out of trouble. So it's what's amazing to get started with this, to create this process of just being prayerful and just reach out to people today through the internet and through different sources to try to get all the information and the shoulder to lean on, and don't reinvent the wheel again and again. You know, if
And
I think what was going to happen is just like we just spoke about earlier about the eminent domain. What's going to happen, I think what's going to happen was that they were just going to take the headstones down and extend whatever development they wanted out, until we put a roadblock in their way. Say, no, wait a minute, no, it's people that know that this cemetery is there. And I have a great recollection of the cemetery, and so do a lot of the other descendants. Some of them older than I am that saw the same thing I saw, as a young man when I was like 8 or 9 years old, running through the cemetery, going to my aunt's house, and first I would say, well, maybe I didn't see certain things, but I kept saying, no, I saw this. And then people I didn't know that have descendants, have people buried there, family members buried there, start reflecting the same thing that I had said without even knowing me. We never like sat down and said, oh, when I was a kid, I saw the vegetation was so high you couldn't even know it was a cemetery. These people that are in their 70s, late 70s and 80s experienced the same experience I had. So I know it was valid, but getting the city to move forward with funding to restore the cemetery has been my greatest push. And then I want to also see, because it was named after Frederick Douglass in 1895, but the cemetery really dates back before that. What happened was Frederick Douglass came to Alexandria and spoke at the old Alexandria Opera House on September the 4th of 1894. He died 5 months later, February 1895. So the people that granted the land at the time, the Howells, it was a husband and wife, and at the time, Alexandria was a part of Washington, D.C. They granted that land for burials for African Americans, because up until that point, they would just discard the body wherever. Some people even buried the bodies in their front yard. It all depends if you was a property owner. But with that being said, they said, hey, well, Frederick Douglass spoke here on Emancipation Day, matter of fact, and they named the cemetery after him. But really, for a couple of years, it was a caretaker for the cemetery. And I have a picture of a gentleman way back in the 50s that it was the late 60s, excuse me, that came in and started cutting down some of the shrubbery. My vision and that of others descendants is that we put a granite marble wall there with a gate around it with the names of everybody that we have on record that's buried there.
the issue is supposed to go before the city council next month. Okay. But my statement is this in response to that. They already know what the issue is. Okay. This is just dragging it out. Now we're moving into like the third winter now, when nothing can really be done. Spring comes back next year and it's going to be heavy rains again. So the process continues. So it's not getting any better. And what the city is saying, we don't want to release this fund and start any renovation because we don't know who owns the property. Where the city in times past has used, as Michael Johnson alluded to, eminent domain. Okay, the property has been abandoned for decades. Okay, that means abandonment to us. And they're saying they've reached out to the owners. Only one owner has responded. Okay, that's level number 2 to me, indicating abandonment. So what more does it take? And that knowledge I don't have as far as the full legal process and implementing eminent domain and how long does it take. But in the meantime, we're sitting on $2.6 million. We have a historic African-American cemetery that's being degraded day by day, by month, by year, when the money is there to start the renovation, and honor those that's buried there and respect those descendants that are still alive.
Before the actual survey, we didn't want to go in and do anything to the cemetery until we understood how to do it in a good way. So we had a lot of programs events. With the pandemic, things were online. We worked with the local universities. One of our board members was on staff at Duke, and he had a service learning class, and those students did research. Taught them to do a little bit of genealogy research. And we also, during the pandemic, we trained volunteers to do genealogy works research. And that's where we focus. We started developing life stories for the people. To me, that's all part of the preservation too. It's not just physical. And we started out by putting, if you go to our Facebook page, we have, and you've probably been to all these places, so why am I telling you? Go to our Facebook page. We do these Day of Honor posts. We've really slowed down on them. Mainly because I think the list is getting really short, and I'm at a point now we've got to do some rejuvenation too, with our volunteers and or with what we do. And so we would post those out there, and that drew interest to us by having these events where we're like the students at Duke, when they were culminating their class by reading the life stories they created. Now, that was in 2020 because we were supposed to do that in the cemetery, but because of the pandemic, we did it online, but that gave us a much broader audience. We had people from California and Massachusetts listening in on that. I'm sure there were parents of students, but that's okay. We'll take them too. But we did events like that. The very first event we held at the cemetery was in 2019. We had what we call a restoration ceremony, where one of the headstones that had fallen, and another partnership we have is with Durham Marble Works in Durham. They've been partners with Friends of Gear for a long time. They reset a headstone, and so we researched the two individuals on there. We were trying very hard to get their family in order to have family descendants there that day. We didn't succeed in getting them in a day, but they were there the next day. We also had a libation ceremony as part of that, and we did a very quick, because we were still just within a couple of months of forming, we just did a very quick research on a few of the headstones that were along the carriage trail, so that we could talk about some other people in the cemetery. And that turned out to be it came out much better than we thought in terms of participation. We had probably about 50 people there, but we had several news media. So we got on we were on TV, and that's what happened with the descendants we were reaching. Somebody local saw it and said, "Wait a minute, that they knew that family," and so then they called the people I have been trying to call. That people don't know who you are. They're not. I do the same thing. People don't answer the phone, or you leave. Hey, I'm researching your family. Okay. So what do you want? Since I get all of that, and for that reason, it was a little disappointment. But it just so happened that the grandson of one of the names on the headstone was traveling to Durham for his 50th reunion, and they all came to the cemetery like the next day, and they had pictures, and they actually could see the headstone of their ancestors standing up, and I actually got a chance to talk to the grandson at a later time. And
I have not been able to get onto the property. I actually have a very good friend who is a surveyor. His name is Mike Lindley. We went and took maps, and he mapped it out. We couldn't go on the property because I didn't have permission yet, and I want to go on the property and find it, but he mapped it out. We printed a huge, large map, and it shows the location of the 25 acres where Mr. Edmund Patton, his last name was Patton also. I believe his original surname was Hawkins. That's according to his children's information. But yeah, it needs to be found. It needs to be saved and preserved, because I don't care who you are. If you're polka dot, I don't care who you are. Everyone deserves to be remembered. And these people they were wonderful human beings. They lived there. They built the house, the bricks of the actual home, which is still standing. They made with their own hands. They built the house from the ground up. And there's so many wonderful stories about them. And I love each and every one of them. You know, I never knew them, but their stories, you know, it makes you love them even more, want to help them even more, even though they're not here anymore.
Are you aware of the state of the cemetery? Is it in disrepair? Is it in need of care? Is it in need of
Yes.
funding?
Yeah.
Walk me through that.
It's in need of funding. I have actually spoken with the Alabama Historical Commission about the family cemetery, which is already saved. But for me to be able to save it and protect it, I've got to be able to get into it. And I have not been able to get permission from the owner to actually go onto the property to look for the cemetery, protect these people and protect them from being disturbed any more than they have been over the years, you know. And I've got a lot of good people to help me to locate it. All these people have donated their time to help me. I have a group out of Florida, which is a 12-hour drive from where I am, that has dogs. She has dogs that are trained specifically to find remains. She has volunteered to give her time and effort to come up here and go onto the property and actually locate the cemetery. What they do is they find the perimeter of the cemetery first, then we know where we are, we know what we got to do, and then they'll locate at least 4 or 5 graves inside the cemetery. And she's willing to do that just out of the goodness of her heart. You know, it's a nonprofit group down in Florida. I've got the means to find these people, and I know they're there because I have warranty deeds. I have a warranty deed from 1894 of the property owner, Mr. Patton, who was the slave or the house servant for the governor. And I have the warranty deed he had, and I also have a new warranty deed from the new owners that state there is a cemetery there. And I just want the opportunity to be able to go in there and find them.
The situation is that even on the marker with the city of Gretna, the cemetery is basically co-opted as far as I'm concerned, and I would say pretty much stolen ground. And the reason I'm saying that is because on the marker it says, while it doesn't acknowledge and omits the history of it being a cemetery of the enslaved, in which we know, because even when John McDonough was buried there, because he was such a prominent and eccentric person, there was news coverage of the day that he was buried. And the newspaper accounts for the fact that he's being buried that this plantation owner, this person who enslaved people, is being buried in the cemetery with the people that he enslaved. So that's historically documented. There is no mention of those graves on the marker, and what it says is prominent families rest here. So if you look at the cemetery, the McDonoughville Cemetery today is well maintained. It looks like your traditional New Orleans cemetery as far as the architecture of the graves are concerned. There are some unmarked burials there, but we don't know that who those burials are. I've inquired with the city of Gretna, a public records request for their records, and they gave me something from the 1800s. I think it starts in the 1890s, but they have, so it's listed according to row or walkway or whatever it's called and lot number, but they did not include the names of the individuals. And I've asked the city of Gretna since that time if these are public, like if this is an active sale because you're selling somebody a plot and it's recorded in conveyances, why would the names of the individuals that it was sold to, why is that not part of the public record? And I've never gotten a response from the city of Gretna to explain either why that's been omitted or from the public record, or to either provide an updated public record that would include that information. And so that McDonoughville Cemetery is now part of the McDonoughville Historic District.
What do you think should be done on a national level to make the process easier, to make these cemeteries, specifically African American cemeteries, respected on a grand scale? What do you think should be done? Should there be a national law? Should there be more funding for this new program that was established? What do you think should be done?
Well, the first thing we need to do is tell the truth. Because until we do that, I mean, I do think we need to have laws. I do think we need to have the funding. But I think the first thing we need to start with is the truth. Because if we're not willing to tell the truth, McDonoughville Cemetery, unless somebody's reading historic records or articles, they would not know the history of the cemetery. So you have to start with the truth and the truth telling. And then the next thing is the accountability. Because it's not that I don't have the records. It's not that I don't have the research. It's that I have a situation where there is no political will, because once again, these municipalities are only concerned about their liability in the matter or losing their investment. And regarding the city of Gretna, I guess my concern or take on that is that if it doesn't belong to them, it's almost like saying somebody stole a car and they souped the car up, put a great paint job on it, put some rims on it, a new engine, and then when the person who the car was stolen from says, hey, look, I'd like my car back, then they say, oh, I want to protect my investment because I put too much money in this car, but it wasn't your car in the beginning.
Right.
So I think that's the type of scenario we have here. But the first things that you have to have is the truth, and you have to have the accountability regarding these public officials, because the only thing they're concerned about at this moment is not about the truth, not about respecting the burials of the enslaved, not about restoring people's lives who have been wrong, but how much money is this going to cost us? And if it's going to cost us too much money to address the historical wrongs and the present day wrongs that are happening present day because of the historical wrongs, we just won't say anything. We just won't do anything.
I have a total of 15 relatives that are in Holyoke. 2 of them or 3 of them, I don't know, because there's no marker. I don't know where they're buried, but 11 of them are in a family plot that I do know where they're at, and they're all the graves are maintained. But it's like a needle in a haystack, because to get to them, it's deplorable. I made numerous attempts with the state of Louisiana, with the city of Pineville, the city of Alexandria, to get some help, to get somebody to come down there and look at that cemetery. And the only thing that I was told was that because it's a private cemetery, the city nor state could not provide any resources whatsoever.
Ms. Johnson, knowing that this is happening all across the nation, are you shocked at all?
No, not at all. But I guess what's so heartbreaking to me is because I've got that relationship for Holyoke, because that's where my family is.
This by far is not the only Black cemetery that is just in atrocious shape, just totally neglectful. 2 of the lynching victims are buried in unknown graves in what they call the Negro Cemetery in Boyce, which is a nearby community. And it is so bad at that important African-American cemetery, you cannot walk in. The forest has completely taken over. Another cemetery in downtown Pineville, just a short distance, quarter mile from Holyoke, it's called Wesley Methodist. There's another lynching victim buried there. There's also war victims, including a Spanish-American war victim, as well as former slaves buried in there.
Would you all like to see a national law or something done on a national scale to address this state by state?
I would be one to say yes. If they were to make that or put that on the ballot for a national vote, it would be hands down for me. Definitely. Yes. And especially with graves being cracked open, and you could see the skeleton remains. That's horrible.
My enslaved ancestors were the ones who came in with the original white settlers in 1818 or so. And our community is called the Macedonia community, which is the first community in what we call the Lowndes, Valdosta, Brooks County metro region. This is the first little settlement that they came into. And we wanted to honor our ancestors by giving them that title.
What are some of the big challenges that you guys have faced right now, you know, maintaining and the upkeep and also just the existence of the cemetery?
Now, this land, it came to our family right after the Civil War. You understand how when they took the land away from the Confederates, and then by whatever, my family ended up with the deeds to the most of it. And they held the deeds. We've still got a piece of it we're trying to hold on to, but the land changed hands over the years from the 1930s, fast forwarding up to 2019, 2018, I believe. And we've held our history so closely because of the controversial nature of our family. My family is the Mary Turner lynching family. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with that. The female who was lynched, May of 1918, the baby was cut out of her tummy. That is my family. And the reason being, we protected many people over the years. It's just, I get emotional. I am emotional.
Are you surprised to know there's so many cases like yours or the one in Clayton County that are happening nationwide?
I have no words. I am absolutely can't believe it.
Last words, Miss Fannie Marie, if you could reach out to not just your county, but the nation as to ask them to take these issues seriously about preserving our Black burial sites. I mean, what would you say to people in charge about why it's important to preserve them and make it a priority to preserve them?
For peace. For peace. I love America. These people died for America too. Let's just have some peace.
Are you surprised at all to know that you're not the only one going through this?
No, it's an epidemic. It's a pandemic in epic proportion. I mean, they're erasing our history everywhere. And that's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And it's not just a Black thing. It is a human rights issue. Yes, it's mostly happens to Black people, but any state or county that overlook this is not only doing a great injustice to the state, but as a race of human being, it's just wrong.
I know that when we reach out to so many states, and Mississippi included, they basically told us that they don't know how many Black cemeteries there are. They don't know how many databases, if they even have a database. We only counted literally a handful that has a database recording Black cemeteries. Do you think this is something that needs to change?
Yeah, so let me tell you, in Carroll County, okay, in Carroll County, which is one of 82 counties, there are thousands of African Americans, thousands, okay? My family go back 6 generations from slavery. I mean, and here's the kid part. My grandmother, Mary Jane McCain, is the daughter of the late John McCain's great-grandfather. That's how far our history goes back. In Carroll County, they have a library. They have a record of every white cemetery, every white family that lived and when they died. There is not one record of one Black family, not one. Not one, to this very day.
Even though the majority of people, the majority population in Mississippi is Black, which is the crazy part, you know?
And especially in that county, Carroll County. They've taken all of their land. There are no record of these people existing other than the grave site, and now they've taken that piece as well, and nothing's being done about it.
Do you plan on taking any more steps, Mary, at all? Do you plan on fighting this again, or I guess what are your next steps?
Listen, I have paid 5 attorneys, thousands of dollars. They do the research, but they will not take my case to court. To date, I cannot find an attorney to represent me at all, to fight any issue regarding the stealing of our land, the grave site. Even I called the local newspaper for them to write a story when I found out about the desecration of the grave.
This family started in the 1790s, came to the top of the hill in Heinsberg, and they chose that because it had 4 hours more sunlight than down at the bottom of the hill, even though it was harder to get to. Once they got up there and once they, settled their land, they had 4 hours more sunlight than the bottom, and they were a very successful farming community that we can tell from the agricultural census reports that they were on. Everybody wasn't in an agricultural census report, only farms that were succeeding were. And they started the cemetery up there, and within living memory, people remember when it was an intact cemetery. Older people, even older than me, do remember when it was an intact cemetery. And around in the early 1960s, apparently people went in there and just destroyed the whole thing. Now you can see shards of, we can see like the roots of maybe the oldest graves that were made out of slate or something of that nature. And they were just all broken off, but you can still see a little bit on the bottom, sticking up a little bit. We also see some marble shards, some of them with the weeping willow, insignia on them. But there's not a lot there. So we continue to look for money to make sure that this is maintained. The way it is, there's not much to maintain, but rake it up, make sure it looks good. And we would like to get a grant of some kind to put a monument there.
So many people can just say, this is not my community. This is not my problem. They're dead, they're gone. Why does it matter anyway? The fact that you're so involved and invested, what would you say to people who don't think that way, that don't think that it's worth preserving or that it's not their problem?
Well, the erasure of history is everybody's problem. This is our history. This is a biracial story on top of that hill in Heinsberg. This is an American story. This is everybody's story. And it needs to be preserved for everybody, because if we don't know these stories and if we don't understand what has happened to people in the past that leads up to today, then we're not going to ever fix all the problems in this country. And Lord knows we got a few.
And just to clarify, this cemetery is not in any database. It's not recorded at all.
Correct.
What keeps you going, Elise? Before we finish, what keeps you going when it comes to making sure that these stories are told? And is it just knowing that people still need to be aware of their history? What keeps you going?
My father's Lebanese, and he's very dark. His father was French Canadian, and who was blonde, blue-eyed, married my grandmother, who was a dark Lebanese woman. That family of my white, blue-eyed grandfather, his family never forgave him for marrying a woman with dark skin. And when you go to the cemetery this is in St. Albans, Vermont, when you go to the cemetery, you see every other member of the family with big headstones and with perpetual care. We couldn't find my grandfather's grave, although it was supposedly there somewhere. We finally found it by digging. He had only a little flat stone and no perpetual care on his, and it was covered up with grass and dirt. We had to dig it out. And this is because he married a woman with dark skin. So the stuff you can see on the landscape is just incredible. We have to save all of these stories like that.